This series is about connecting the lineage of each baseball team from its inception through to today in the fewest number of players possible. Some new franchises find immediate success, while others languish in the second division for decades, and must build and rebuild before reaching the heights of World Series champions. Today's team is one that had to endure heartbreak, rebuilds, and lost careers before reaching the zenith of the game, only to have that championship questioned because of scandal. Today, we will meet the 6 players that connect the origins of the team through to today's dominant organization. Let's begin our journey on the 6 degrees of the Houston Astros. Houston had long been a minor league city, but had grown in populations for decades. By 1958, the Houston metro area had already eclipsed 1 million people. The closest teams to Texas were the St. Louis Cardinals and Kansas City A's, a city whose population Houston had already surpassed. On July 4th of 1957, public relations man George Kirksley and local businessman Bill Kirkland brought together local business interests at this site, the first national bank building, to form the Houston Sports Association. After lobbying the National and American Leagues and developing an expansion team, the organization linked up with William Shea to form a third major league. William Shea was trying to bring National League Baseball back to New York after the loss of the Dodgers to LA. The league never formed, as the major leagues would expand, adding 4 new teams, 2 in each league. The National League would expand back into New York and into Houston, while the American League would expand to LA and Washington. The Washington Senators would eventually move from Washington to Arlington, giving Texas its second team. The Astros came into the league as the Colt 45s as part of the 1962 National League expansion with the Mets. The expansion draft was held and Houston would take shortstop Eddie Brizard from the Giants. The Mets would also take a player from the Giants with their pick. To see how that turned out for the Mets, you can check out their episode on 6 Degrees by clicking on the top right corner. Eddie Brizard would never wear a Houston uniform, as he was dealt to Boston the next month in exchange for Don Budin. Budin would take the field manning the shortstop position for Houston's inaugural game on April 10th of 1962. The Astros move from minor league to major league city necessitated a new stadium. As the construction of a permanent home was underway, the Colt 45s would play in a temporary stadium aptly named Colt Stadium. Not much of a stadium, the Colts played in the hot summers of Houston, amid mosquitoes and rattlesnakes. But all was right for that one day in Houston, as the Colts starter Bobby Shantz would pitch a complete game against the Cubs for the 11-2 victory. Budin would go 0-3 with a strikeout, leaving Houston as a footnote in their history, as he wouldn't finish the season with the team, with his contract purchased by the Tigers in July of that year. But playing on Budin's right on that day was Bob Aspermonte. Bob was the Colts' second pick in the draft, this time coming from the Dodgers. He would become a fixture at the hot corner for Houston through their Colt 45 days, as the team struggled, losing 96 in each of their first 3 years. With the opening of the Astrodome in 1965, the team made the name change to the now familiar Astros moniker, and Bob was again at third base to see the opening of the 8th wonder of the world. Going 1-4, the Astros may have had a new name and home, but the same struggles continued, as the opening 2-0 loss to the Phillies would kick off another losing season, this time a franchise record 97 losses. By 1968, the Astros had not had a season in which they lost less than 90 games, and Bob, though only 30 and coming off his best year, would see his production return to the subpar level it had been. After the 1968 season, he was traded to the recently relocated Atlanta Braves from Marty Martinez. That same season saw Dave Justy traded to the Cardinals, and the last 2 original Colt 45s were gone forever. In the initial year of the Astros, 1965, another Bob was being signed by the team, a backup amateur free agent, Bob Watson. No Bob emergency here for the Astros. Seeing only 7 at-bats in his first 2 seasons, the 22-year-old would take on greater duties in 1968 as a 4th outfielder. As both Bobs were vying for playing time as pinch hitters and backup outfielders, the two rarely shared the field together. The Bobs would play their last game together in 1968 on July 31st, as Watson would be the starting left fielder while Aspermonte would again man the hot corner for the Astros, resulting in a 6-1 loss to the Cubs. With Aspermonte's departure, Watson was all set to take on a larger role with the team. But as fate would have it, he would see even less time in the 1969 season. Appearing in only 20 games, the 24-year-old Watson had played parts of 4 seasons in the majors, but only accumulated 72 games and 218 plate appearances, with more than 70% of those coming in the 1968 season. The 1970 season would see big changes for Watson, as his power began to develop, slugging 11 homers, to secure his first 100-plus game season in 1971. While things were trending upward for Watson, the club was still without its first winning season. Watson would have his breakout year for the club in 1972, slugging a career-high 16 homers with an .841 OPS, as the Astros finally finished above 500 for the first time with an 84-win season. This, of course, would get them nowhere close to the playoffs in the 1970s, so the team continued to languish in the middle of the division before the wheels fell off in 1975. An 8-16 April spelled disaster for the Astros, who would finish with 97 losses. The highlight of the season, however, would come via Bob Watson. On May 4th, in the first game of a doubleheader against the San Francisco Giants, Bob would draw a leadoff walk to open the second inning. 2 batters later, Milt May would smack a home run to right field, and as Bob Watson crossed the plate, he would become the 1 millionth run scored in Major League Baseball history. Bob would stay with Houston until being traded in the 1979 season, having appeared as an All-Star twice and receiving MVP votes 3 times. His efforts would go unrewarded, however, as the Astros would never again finish a year above 500 with Watson on the team. Watson would be shipped off to Boston on June 13th for 2 pitchers, as the Astros were finally in contention and were making a push for their first playoff appearance. 2 days before he was traded, on the 11th, the Astros were in Philly, and young sensation Terry Poole was patrolling the vast center field of Veterans Stadium. Terry had been called up to the big club 2 years earlier and shown flashes of a future star at the young age of 20. In his second year, he would make the All-Star team, securing his position as leadoff man and starting center fielder for the team. His emergence as a starter made Watson a more superfluous piece, leading to his eventual trade. Poole would go 1 for 5 and Watson would make a pinch-hitting appearance, replacing catcher Bruce Bochy in the ninth. Watson would ground out and the Phillies would win the game 4-2. With the Astros leading the division by a game and a half over the Reds, the Astros would pull the trigger on the deal with Boston to secure pitching and try and hold off the last gasp of the Big Red Machine. Bob Watson would go on to play until 1984 for the Red Sox, Yankees, and Braves. But it was in his post-playing career that he would have the greatest impact. After his retirement, he would join the Astros front office as their GM in 1993, becoming only the second black general manager in baseball. After 2 seasons in Houston, he was hired away by the Yankees as their GM. When the Yankees won the World Series in 1996, Watson became the first black GM to ever win a World Series, and his move bringing in lefty power bats Darryl Strawberry and Cecil Fielder would prove a difference maker, as the Yankees would secure their first title in almost 20 years. After his 2 years with the Yankees, Bob would move to the MLB offices and be instrumental in putting together the 2000 Olympic baseball team that would take home the gold. For more on that team and their manager Tommy Lasorda, you can check out the Dodgers episode of 6 Degrees by clicking the link in the top right corner. Now back to our story in the Astros playoff push of 1979. Terry Poole would be front and center for that push and eventual collapse. After the trade, the Astros would go 15-5 while the Reds would stumble to as many as 10.5 games back. The Astros would themselves stumble into the All-Star break, but still sported a 6-game lead. By September 10th, that lead was a measly half game, as the Reds would welcome the Astros to town for a 2-game series showdown. In Game 1, the Reds got off to a 4-run lead in the 4th, but the Astros would answer back to tie it by the 6th. The Reds would again take the lead in the bottom of the 6th, and the Astros would answer back with 3 in the 7th, taking a 7-6 lead. The battle-hardened Reds would get those 3 right back in their half of the frame, and despite 2 leadoff singles in the 9th, the Astros would plate only 1 run, and the Reds would take the game. The Reds would end up winning both games and claim the division lead. The 2 teams would meet one more time, this time for 3 games in Houston, with the Reds holding a 2.5-game division lead. Game 1 would be an epic 13-inning knockdown drag-out fight, seeing the Astros come out on top 3-2, thanks to a walk-off single by Bruce Bochy. Game 2 would be a bit easier on the Astros, as a first-inning run would be all the Houston pitchers would allow in the 4-1 victory. The Astros were now only a half game out with 1 more game in the series left to play. Astros starter Vern Rule would implode in the 4th, allowing 5 runs on 3 consecutive Reds hits, including 1 to the opposing pitcher Frank Pastore. For his part, Pastore would pitch a complete game, allowing just 1 run. The Astros would go on to lose 3 of 4 to Atlanta, the worst team in the division, and they would end up finishing the season just a game and a half back. Despite the sad end to the season, things were looking up, as this was the Astros' best in franchise history. What looked like a bright future for Terry Poole and the Astros would lead to a decade of disappointment and a career of heartbreak, as the Astros would make and be bounced from the playoffs without a series win 3 times in the next 8 seasons. Despite the lack of rings for the teams of the 80s, and having gone to 3 playoff series without a win, the Astros as an organization had arrived and finished the 80s with 819 wins, 7th best in the majors for the decade. While Poole was never a superstar, he played with the Astros for part of 3 decades, and was inducted into the Astros Hall of Fame in 2022. He may not be remembered by all baseball fans, but I'm sure old school Astros fans have a place in their hearts for Terry Poole. By the time Terry left the club in 1990, the Astros were once again a sub-500 team, but there were new stars emerging, one of them even a superstar, nay, a Hall of Famer. Let's rewind back to June 26, 1988. 2 years removed from their last playoff appearance, the Astros are 4 games above 500 and 3.5 behind the Dodgers in a season in which they'll finish in 3rd place. Young Craig Biggio in his age 22 season will get behind the plate for his first big league game. The future member of the 3,000 hit club will go hitless in his 2 at-bats, but he will score the first of his over 1,800 runs, as his 4th inning walk will result in a run. Biggio's first hit comes 3 days later versus the Dodgers. Batting 8th, Biggio singles in his first at-bat of the game. The hit comes off Orel Hershiser, who surrenders only 1 other hit that night. He tosses the complete game shutout to secure the 2-0 win for the eventual World Series winners. Craig Biggio will become a mainstay for the Astros, as he will play his entire 20-year career for the team. Biggio will appear in only 50 games in his first year, but will take on larger catching duties in his next season, before moving to his more familiar second base position in 1992. In Craig's last full year behind the plate, the legendary Killer Bees were formed. As the Rookie of the Year, Jeff Bagwell would make his Major League debut in 1991. Acquired from the Red Sox at the trade deadline in 1990 for reliever Larry Anderson, the trade today is what nightmares are made of. Whenever your team trades prospects for a playoff push acquisition, you're just praying that the deal won't go down like the Bagwell-Anderson trade. The duo took time to mature, but with Biggio and Bagwell in the lineup, the Astros never saw a losing season in the 90s. And by 1997, they had added Derek Bell to the band, and the Killer Bees would be tasked with winning the Astros' first championship as they took over the NL's newly founded Central Division. 3 straight division titles to close out the decade coincided with the rise of the Braves dynasty. The Astros had built a history of losing to champions in their postseason exploits. Now they would be losing to runners-up. The 84-win 97 team may not have been ready, and it showed, as they were bounced from the NLDS in a 3-game sweep by the Braves. The trio of Bagwell, Biggio, and Bell were bested by the Braves trio of Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz, going only 2 for 37 in the series. The following year, however, the Astros were a powerhouse. A 102-win season had been bolstered by a trade deadline acquisition of Randy Johnson. This would assuredly be enough to put Houston over the top and secure their first ever playoff victory. They would have to get past the upstart Padres, who had won 98 games and were led by Tony Gwynn, Greg Vaughn, Kevin Brown, and closer Trevor Hoffman. In Game 1, Johnson would surrender just 2 runs in his 8 innings of work, but Brown would let none cross the plate, and a late rally by the Astros in the 9th was quashed by Hoffman, giving the Padres the win. The Astros would never recover and lost the series in 4 games. In the end, the Bees would bat just 146 for the series with a lone home run, though they did account for 6 of the team's 7 RBIs in the series. For the 1999 redo, they would again be matched up against the Braves. The Astros would best Greg Maddux in Game 1, but drop Game 2 as the series shifted to Houston. A 12-inning affair would lead to a Braves victory, and the Astros would be dispensed from the playoffs once again in 4 games. As in previous years, the bats fell silent, as the combo of Biggio and Bagwell hit just 156 in the series, with Bell having only 3 at-bats. The Astros had now been to the playoffs 6 times and had never once won a single series. A brief hiatus in 2000 and were back at it again in 2001. This time, they would take on the Braves. The Braves would roll through with a sweep. Only Game 2 was close, as Glavine would take a 1-0 victory, pitching 8 innings of shutout baseball. The Astros were now 0 for 7 in playoff series. Lance Berkman had replaced Derek Bell as the third B in this year's iteration, but the results were much the same. A .226 combined average may have looked like an improvement, but all of the B's 7 hits were singles. Neither Hall of Fame hitter nor pitcher seemed to be able to get this team over the hump. Biggio had been a perennial all-star, racking up 150-plus hit seasons year after year, but all the success of the Killer Bees was going to waste with poor postseason showings. In 2004, Biggio was in his age 38 season and nearing the end of his career. If the job of winning in the postseason was going to be done with Biggio and the team, it would have to be done soon. The Astros' answer? A 4th Killer Bee, Carlos Beltran. Some younger fans might not remember that Beltran had an earlier stint with the Astros before his more controversial stay with the team in 2017. Beltran was a phenom in Kansas City and nearing free agency. The Astros were able to acquire him in June as part of a 3-team deal. Beltran's addition was helpful, but the Astros were already a good regular season team. The question was what would happen in the postseason. Beltran's answer to that question was historic. The Astros won the wild card with 92 wins, and once again would square up against the Braves in the division series. A 5-game knockdown drag-out fight would ensue. The bats wouldn't be silenced this time as the Astros bashed 4 homers in the opener and won handily 9-3. Beltran's 4 home runs in the series would get the team's first ever postseason win. The new 4-man Killer Bees would hit .430 for the series with 8 home runs. Even though Beltran gets much of the credit for his hitting prowess, each of the Killer Bees would have an OPS over 1,000 for the series. With the hated Braves finally vanquished and their first postseason victory in the books, it looked like this could be the year for the Astros. They would meet the 105-win Cardinals, who took the division by 13 games. Be it that the Astros were elated to have won a series or were exhausted from that win, the Cardinals took the first 2 games from the Astros in St. Louis. Things were looking bleak for the Astros, but the series shifted to Houston, and the Astros came alive, winning all 3 games and setting up a Game 6, in which they could ensure their first trip to the World Series. The Cardinals led by a run in the 9th, all set to force a Game 7, when a Bagwell single scored the tying run. With 2 outs, the Astros needed to score again to ensure they wouldn't have to endure an extra inning game. After a Beltran-Bagwell double steal, Berkman would strike out and the game would indeed go to extras, where Jim Edmonds would end it with a walk-off homer in the 11th. Game 7 would see the Killer Bees finally shut down, going just 1 for 15, as the Cardinals would win the deciding game 5-2. The series was over, but at least they had won a series. Beltran would move on the next year to sign a big deal in New York, but the Astros would again find themselves in the playoffs in 2005. They would have to travel the exact same road as last year, Braves in the NLDS, whom they again dispatched, this time in 4 games, to get to the NLCS against the Cardinals. The 2 teams split the games in St. Louis, shifting the series to Houston, who won the first 2 games of the series. Game 5 could see the Astros clinch their first ever pennant at home in their beautiful new park that had only opened a few years prior. Oddly, even though the Astros will prevail in this series, it is this game that most people remember from it. With the Astros up 4-2 in the 9th, and their lockdown closer Brad Lidge on the mound, everything was set for celebration. 2 quick strikeouts and now they were only 1 out away. David Eckstein would single, but no problem. A walk to Jim Edmonds, and now people began to worry as Albert Pujols walked to the plate. Get him out and you win the pennant. Let him on and, well, back to St. Louis we go. As I said, the Astros did prevail in Game 6 and secured the pennant. Biggio, at 39 years old and a member of the club since 1988, had finally reached the World Series. While the World Series was a White Sox sweep and Biggio hit only .222, each game was close. The Astros never lost by more than 2 runs, and there was an extra inning loss thrown in there just for good measure. Biggio would never reach the postseason again, but he brought them closer than anyone before. With 6 trips to the playoffs in his career and a league title, he did everything he could. His dreams of a championship would end with him standing on the on-deck circle at Minute Maid Park, watching the White Sox celebrate on his field. Their window was closed, and while he played for another 2 seasons, those years were the beginning of a long and hard rebuild. As the Astros moved into a new phase in their history, one which will see that long and painful rebuild, we will shift our focus to the 5th player on our continuum. Let's step back to that 2005 World Series. Game 1 saw a matchup of Roger Clemens taking on Jose Contreras. Clemens, 42 by then, would surrender 3 runs in just 2 innings. A long man would be needed to get through this game. That long man was Wandy Rodriguez. He would pitch 3 1/3, surrendering just 1 run, but that run would get him tagged with the loss in the game. He would make one more appearance in the series in the extra inning Game 3 affair to close out the 14th after the damage had already been done. Wandy Rodriguez was signed by the Astros as an amateur free agent in 1999 and would make his MLB debut in that same 2005 season. His tenure as an Astro would extend to 2012 when he was dealt to the Pirates in July. A serviceable starter, his best year came in 2009 when he pitched to a 3.02 ERA with a 1.36 ERA+. The problem, the Astros were a terrible team in the midst of a rebuild. In Wandy's tenure, the team would play to a .456 winning percentage, and this wasn't even the low point of the rebuild. Perhaps because of the nature of rebuilding the Central Division, Wandy received no accolades for his work. Not an award, not even a mention. Often when teams rebuild, we think of journeymen who hold spots or younger players not quite ready for the show. But Wandy was an above-average professional pitcher for the better part of 8 seasons for the Astros and gave them something to believe in when there was nothing special to see. That is until Wandy's last full season with the Astros, when on July 20th of 2011, a 5'0" kid out of Venezuela manned Craig Biggio's second base position for the first time. Of course, the 6th and final member of this list needs no introduction. This was the MLB debut of Jose Altuve. Behind the plate for that first game was Humberto Quintero, the only other member of the 2005 World Series team still on the roster. Altuve would make his presence known right away with a 9th inning single, beginning a 7-game hit streak to tie the longest to begin a career. But the Astros were still terrible, finishing the season with 96 losses. 2012 was not better, losing a franchise record 107 games. But Altuve would make his first All-Star game. With Wandy and Quintero traded during the 2012 season, it was all new faces. Altuve would have to weather this storm alone. After the 2012 season, the Astros were moved from the NL Central to the AL West to better align the divisions and give the Astros an in-state rival. The AL West was no less kind to the Astros than the NL Central had been, as a new franchise low of 111 losses was set in the 2013 season. 2014 saw small improvements for the 92-loss team. But if you were watching closely as Sports Illustrated writer Ben Ritter was when he pronounced the team the 2017 World Champs in June 2014, you would know that this team was not meant for the basement for much longer. The core of the Astros were in the majors or minors, Altuve, Correa, Springer, but it takes more than players to win it all. The Astros have been littered with Hall of Fame players and no World Series. It would take something different for the Astros to win it all. In 2011, while the Astros were mired in their worst run of their organizational history, a new GM was brought in, Jeff Luhnow. Luhnow's background was not in baseball, but in engineering, and after starting with the Cardinals organization, he would be tasked with engineering the Astros' first World Series ring. Jeff's approach was data-heavy and relied heavily on analytics. The full story on the over-exuberance of the Astros way can be seen on the frontline story The Astros Edge, Triumph and Scandal in Major League Baseball. Suffice it to say, the Astros became a bit too obsessed with finding an edge to win. When aging superstar Carlos Beltran was brought back onto the team to be a veteran presence, both he and the team were desperate to win at any cost. The development of the electronic sign stealing system was implemented and deployed, in part by Beltran and the organization's win at any cost mentality. Sadly, Altuve would have to play the role of whipping boy when the scandal broke, as he was the face of the franchise. Exhaustive research by fellow YouTubers have shown that it was unlikely that Altuve was an active participant in the trash can banging, but he did profit from the system. The Astros had won their first World Series in 2017, but because of the scandal, an asterisk the size of Barry Bonds' head was placed next to it. Redemption would have to come in the form of a clean World Series victory. A loss to the Nationals in 2019, in which the visiting team won every game, would deny the Astros that redemption, and we wouldn't even talk about the 2020 season. The 2021 World Series was their next chance to prove the naysayers wrong. Altuve hit only .222 in the series, as the bats went cold and the Braves won the title in 6 games. Another year and still no redemption for Altuve. Once one of the most beloved players in the game, he was now the face of the most hated franchise in baseball. Sometimes the bad guys win, but sometimes those who we think are the bad guys aren't really that bad at all. The 2022 World Series would see the Astros make their 4th World Series appearance in 6 years. The team couldn't stay together forever. In fact, only a handful of the players on the 2017 roster were still with the team for the 2022 year, but Altuve was one of them. A sweep of the Mariners making their first postseason appearance in 20 years was followed by a sweep of the Yankees, which would pit the Astros against the wildcard Phillies. An extra inning affair in Game 1 would produce the expected result for an extra inning playoff game for the Astros as the Phillies won 6-5 and 10. After splitting the next 2, the Phillies were in control and could even clinch at home. But the Astros weren't going to roll over. A dominant performance by Christian Javier in Game 4 tied up the series, and a 2-for-4 performance by Altuve sparked the offense to win Game 5. As the series shifted back to Houston, a place the Astros had found ironically exceedingly difficult to win in the World Series, the Astros were poised to shut down the Boo Birds and quiet the haters. Altuve would go 1-for-4 with a run scored, but this game was remembered for Alvarez's homer that scored Altuve and gave the Astros the lead, which would be the difference maker as the Astros exercised their demons and won the 2022 World Series, a feat which could now not be questioned. From feel-good story to villain to redemptive figure, the Shakespearean career of Jose Altuve shows us that the path to glory is fraught with peril, but perseverance is the key to success. So hate them if you will, but Altuve deserves your respect, if not as a person, then as a player. So there it is. Bob Espromonte, Bob Watson, Terry Poole, Craig Biggio, Wandy Rodriguez, and Jose Altuve. 1962 to 2024. 6 degrees from team creation. If you like this and want to see more, let me know. A like, share, and subscribe would mean a lot. What team should we do next? Leave it in the comments. Have a great one.
Go, go, Astros! Here come the Astros, burning with desire. Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros, with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, #1 every time. Baseball's